was just a skirmish. And this was common. We'd go over to the Canadian side and do a raid, or the British side, and then they would come over and try to do raids on our side. Essentially, the British had to bring all of their equipment and supplies up the St. Lawrence River and to what we now know as Kingston, Ontario. That was their headquarters. The Americans had to bring all their stuff up to Sackett's Harbor on the American side. The Americans got wind of the British bringing up a major set of supplies consisting of pickled pork and hardtack and other things. And they decided to put together a privateering expedition with 2 gunboats and volunteers, soldiers, and sailors. And they went after it. And they found the British at night. The bateaux were all anchored out, and they had left 1 sentry who was asleep. And so the Americans managed to capture all the supplies and 60 British and marched them to Brownville on Sackett's Harbor. And then they took all their stuff. They knew they couldn't make it all the way up the St. Lawrence River, lugging stuff without running into more British. So they held up. They went up into Goose Bay, New York, about 3 miles east of Alexandria Bay, and then they went up the creek, Cranberry Creek, and they set up a defense because they knew the British were coming back to get their stuff, and they did. 2 or 3 days later, they showed up with 4 gunboats, 1 big one and 3 little ones, and 600 British soldiers, and they proceeded to wind their way up Cranberry Creek. The Americans had taken the cannon from the British boats and mounted them on the shore. And then they had put a log jam across Cranberry Creek. And then when the British inched their way up the winding creek, they stopped to break up the log jam, and the Americans opened fire. The first shot from the cannons hit the rear of one of the boats with the soldiers in it, and dropped all the men into the water. The Americans only had about 50 men. And a lot of they had to guard the 60 that they were marching to Sackett's Harbor, so left them short-handed. But there was a Major Dimoch, and he had 50 people to deploy. He had deployed the cannon and the log jam, and then because it was about a mile up the creek before the log jam, he put marksmen on the shore periodically. So when the British tried to land, they would be fired upon from up above. I estimated that there were 7 American casualties among the 50. At least 3, maybe 4 dead. 1 supposedly buried at number 6 Island. The British, I just don't have a handle on it. The only account that I found, I think other people have gone to Canada and found other accounts, was that a British major was killed. That was a big deal in 1812. That was a very high ranking, and he was the aide-de-camp to the commanding officer. So it was a big deal that that major had been killed. I found people who had artifacts, and you could tell there was some heavy lead flying. We found a lot of musket balls from British rifles, like 46 caliber back then. Logically, because they were on the low ground and trying to land, that they would have a higher casualty rate than the Americans. That was it. Eventually, the British withdrew, I think because it was not worth losing lives over pickled pork and hardtack. And then Major Dimoch, a few days later, he actually dragged bateaux across marshland around what is now number 6 Island, and got them out into the water, and eventually went up to the Clayton area in French and held up at French Creek with the stolen bateau. And then Major Dimoch, supposedly he took one of the gunboats and floated down the Cranberry Creek in the middle of the night, on a foggy night. And the British sentry on the big gunboat said, "Heave to." He said, "Well, just let me under your stern," because there was an outcropping on those ships back then. And but Major Dimoch just turned and left. But it was interesting because he had to be either rowing or sailing on a foggy night. There's no wind But he did. The British gunboat fired upon him, but did not hit him. And I think he might have fired a round at them as well, as I remember. And then he just continued on to Sackett's Harbor. Several years ago, probably early 2000s, I think it was my older brother that handed me a newspaper article in 1965. It described the Battle of Cranberry Creek, which was fought about 3 miles from Alexandria Bay. I vowed that I would look into it the next summer I was staying in Alexandria Bay. A buddy of mine who lived on the shore of Cranberry Creek said, "Well, Lyle, my son, knows exactly where the markers are for the soldiers that died there." And I went, "Okay, Lyle, will you take me down to those?" It was about 200 yards off the road in a very heavily overgrown field, and but right on the shores, and there were 3 small polished granite markers, which was a memorial marker for that era. And so I said, "Okay, let me look into this as soon as I get back." Well, the next summer, instead of making a living, I researched the Battle of Cranberry Creek. When I did the research, I couldn't get that smoking gun that said those 3 granite markers were definitely from the Battle of Cranberry Creek. And I think what happened, there was just like there was the Daughters of the American Revolution, there was an organization called Daughters of the War of 1812. And I think that they wanted to put up markers, but over time they just didn't. Whether they didn't have the funding or whatever, it never got done. So it appears to me that the Daughters of the American Revolution took over. And I actually finally, at the end of all my research, I actually found a newspaper article from, I believe, 1945. And it even had the Daughters of the American Revolution placed those markers there. I even had the name of the contractor and the amount of money they paid the contractor to put those markers there. But then it was a farm, essentially. And then in the 1960s, the Department of Environmental Conservation bought the land. And then they probably didn't even know those markers were there. And it was a favorite bullheading spot for the locals. And according to the locals, it was parents would drive their children by there and stop and just point to markers and say, "War of 1812 soldiers there." Now, that's all they really knew. I think my booklet came out probably in 2005, and it was right around that time when I just wanted to go to the farmer that owned the land. I thought a farmer owned the land. And I wanted to knock on the barn door and say, "Mr. Farmer, you got a piece of American history here." I says, "This is one of the rare instances where American soldiers died on American soil protecting America. And could you at least keep it low?" So my brother was a realtor, and it came time. I'd done my research, and I wanted to find out who owned the land. And essentially, he said, "Oh, go see Sally down at the town hall." I went down to see Sally, and she said, "You're not going to believe this. Who owns the land? The Department of Environmental Conservation of New York State." And now the wind just went out of my sails, because that's one thing to deal with a farmer. It's a whole different thing to deal with the New York State bureaucracy. So, but after about a week, it dawned on me one night when I was working, and I said, "Wait a minute, what do I do for a living? I'm a writer." And so I went down to the editor of the local paper. It was a weekly paper. And I said, "If I wrote a 3-part series on the Battle of Cranberry Creek and these markers down there," I said, "would you publish it?" And she said, "Probably." And she did. So the first week, when the paper came out, I told the story just like I've told you about the Battle of Cranberry Creek. But I also had a picture of one of those knocked down markers. And I said, after I told the story, I said, "And next week, we'll tell you who the landowner is that has let these soldiers' graves go to seed." And the paper came out, and the very next day I had a phone call from the real property manager of the Department of Environmental Conservation, and asking me if he could get an archaeologist up there from Albany, if I could lead them down to those markers. And we clawed through the 200 yards of overgrowth, and we found those markers. And then The archaeologist was good, the real property guy was good. We all realized, yes, this is a piece of history and something has to be done. It's one of those things that was the right thing to do, and then the entire town and state stepped up to the plate. DEC had a trail cut from the Swan Hollow Road down to that area, to those monuments, within a week. And then the town came in, and because it was quite a drop off the road, they built a parking lot. The American Legion put in a flagpole at the parking lot. The Sons of the American Legion set money aside, and they maintain that site to this date and will in perpetuity. It is important for the citizens of Alexandria Bay because that's their heritage. You know, that's their it's their heritage, their military heritage.